and welcome to Money Control. You're watching our special conversation series on Charlie Munger, the man who made Warren Buffett rich. He died on November 28th at the age of 99. He was not only a great thinker and investor, but also a great teacher. Of course, he's also well known for his bluntness, wit, sarcasm, but lots and lots to learn from him about life and investing. So I have another fabulous teacher, distinguished adjunct professor of finance at Flame University, Professor Sanjay Bakshi, who is also fondly known as the Fundu professor. In the past, Sanjay has been adjunct professor at MDI, where he taught for 21 years. He's also a practitioner of value investing. Sanjay, thank you so much for giving us time this morning.
Thank you, Mahalakshmi. Thank you for inviting me.
So first of all, tell me about your experience meeting Charlie Munger. When did you meet him for the first time? What was that experience like? And of course, after that, you know, how has he influenced your life thinking? What have you taken away as lessons from him?
I'll start by saying that I am not mourning his passing. I think I would like to celebrate his life. He left us with a whole body of knowledge which can last more than a few lifetimes for all of us. And we have a lot of work to do to become better investors and better human beings. And I think he was, as you mentioned, a wonderful teacher. I learned about him for the first time in 1990 when I was myself a student at the London School of Economics. And I didn't take him that seriously. I was much more enamored by his partner, Warren Buffett. And I read up everything that Mr. Buffett wrote about in his letters. And frankly speaking, the letters that Charlie Munger used to write were too complex for me to understand at that age. So I didn't take him very seriously. But in 2004, one friend gave me transcripts of 3 of his talks, and two of them were on elementary worldly wisdom, and one of them was on the psychology of human misjudgment. And they were monumental. Basically, when I read through them, I felt that I had to do something. And as it happened, my family was planning to travel to the US, and I canceled that holiday for myself, and I told them to go along. And I spent time reading up those documents and thinking about stuff, and ended up creating behavioral finance and business valuation course at MDI, BFBV, which became the most popular course there. And I went on to teach that for 17 years. I continue to teach at Flame University now using, and there isn't a lecture where I don't have his imprint. He's always there. So there is always something to learn from Charlie, and I feel privileged that I have been able to pass on some of his best lessons to my students. And he had the power to sway you, like he did with so many other people. He swayed Warren Buffett away from his guru, Ben Graham. And I had the privilege of meeting him once. In 2016, I went to LA to have a lunch with him, which was arranged by a friend, Howard Marks. And I touched his feet, and I sought his blessings, and I held on to his walking stick. It was a memorable experience, a very emotional experience for me.
I'm sure. So Sanjay, all of us have taken away something or the other from Munger. I mean, anybody who's in investing has definitely read at least some bits of what he has said. Tell me, what kind of influence? I made the statement at the beginning saying that he is the man who made Warren Buffett rich, and that's absolutely true, because but for See's Candy, like Buffett himself acknowledges, Coke wouldn't have happened, and that entire philosophy of competitive advantage, paying up for quality, all of that was centered around that first investment that Charlie Munger introduced to Buffett. So over the course of that partnership, tell us, what kind of profound impact did Charlie Munger have on Buffett and in the way he, shaped Berkshire into whatever it is today?
So, just one difference of view on this. I think Buffett would have been rich even without Charlie Munger. But yeah, absolutely, he had a huge role to sort of wean him away from his guru, Benjamin Graham, and basically he got Buffett to think about the quality of businesses. And I know this topic has been talked about a lot. I'm not going to talk too much about it. But it really boils down to one big idea that he introduced Warren Buffett to, which is, and everything flows from that idea, And that idea was the power of compound interest inside a business. We are all familiar with the power of compound interest, generally speaking. If you have a investment which compounds money at 12%, and we have an alternate investment which compounds money at 12.3%, after 30 years, the terminal values will be very different simply because of the power of compound interest and the factor of time. But the power of compound interest inside a business is something that he introduced to Warren Buffett. He told him to think about returns on invested capital, which is a compound interest formula inside a business. And then he told him to think about the durability of that. It's not just about a business which earns high returns on capital, but it has to continue to do that. So you get the longevity, you get the durability, and that gets you to moat, and that gets you to entry barriers, and so on and so forth. And then he also showed that there aren't going to be very many such businesses. There are going to be only a handful. So if you find them, then you should put a lot of money behind them, because you won't find very many. And that leads you to position sizing and concentration, and being very choosy, and having exclusion rules of rejecting thousands and thousands of businesses that just don't make sense. So I think the one single biggest role that Charlie had on influence that Charlie had on Mr. Buffett was to wean him away from his own mentor Benjamin Graham and focus on the quality of a business. And if there is one idea that I would say is the single most important idea that he introduced Mr. Buffett to, was the idea of compound interest inside a business. We are all familiar with the idea of compounding capital at 12% versus 12.3% in different investments out there, and how the 12.3% compounding will result in a much larger sum of money after 20 or 30 years as compared to the 12% one. But people don't really think much about compound interest inside a business, which is what returns on invested capital do. If you have capital, and if you can compound it internally at a very high rate of return, then everything follows from that. So basically, he introduced Buffett to focus on businesses that earn high returns on capital and will continue to earn high return on capital. And that second part means that you have to think about entry barriers and moat and durability and all that. So that whole thing comes over there. Then even allocation of capital comes from there. Things like, what should be the dividend policy? If you earn high returns on capital, if you have the opportunities to deploy more capital, then you shouldn't pay any dividends. And Berkshire didn't for the longest time. And so many other businesses that Buffett was invested in. So it was clear that this whole idea of compound interest and durability is very important. In fact, the fact that you're focusing on high quality businesses means that by definition, most businesses are not high quality. Therefore, you're going to be, only investing in a handful of them. And that brings you to the idea of being very choosy and have very strong exclusion rules to eliminate thousands and thousands of businesses out there. That also takes you to the idea of position sizing and concentration, which is a hallmark of the philosophy that Charlie Munger espoused. And it also brings you to the idea of risk. He always equated risk with permanent loss of capital, the probability of permanent loss of capital, and not something that is taught in academic, finance courses, things like beta and other Greek letters out there. So he said, if you are investing in a high quality business anyways, then the return, then you are not going to lose a lot of money over there. The probability of permanent impairment is very low. So everything that you read about in investing actually flows directly from that one single powerful idea about compound interest. So that was one big thing that he taught. I think that was a very big takeaway for many investors, thousands of investors, including for myself. The other big thing that he did was the importance of multidisciplinary thinking. And I refer to the talks that he had that I got as transcripts from a friend. He did a few talks on that subject, and I think anybody who reads those talks would want to become a multidisciplinary thinker. And he had a way with words. He would go around saying that to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, you can't get all the wisdom by studying just one discipline. You have to grab some of the best ideas from multiple disciplines. So he was very fond of subjects like evolutionary biology, of physics, of mathematics and probability, and of course, social psychology, which is a very big thing for him. And he introduced the world to Robert Cialdini, whose book Influence, Science and Practice helped him think through social psychology. And he built his own sort of a list of models that helped him understand human misjudgment. So I think that whole set of what he did with multidisciplinary thinking, particularly about social psychology, had a big role over there for students. And the other big idea that he had was the importance of reductionism, trying to reduce problems from disciplines that are in social science into disciplines that are in hard science. And he had a way of doing that. I think that was one of his best contributions to teaching. And he had a talk on academic economics where he laid out how he exactly does that. So I think that was, again, very brilliant way of explaining that point. Then the other big thing that he has that I took from him was the importance of avoidance, the importance of not doing stupid things, and instead of trying to be very smart. And he had a way to teach that. He said, just look at the people around you, and some very smart people do some very dumb things, and why do they do those things? And he would say that all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I never go there. He wanted to emphasize vicarious experience. He had, as I said, lovely ways of explaining this. He said, you don't have to pee on an electric fence to learn not to do it. You just have to watch other men pee on electric fences and then decide that I'm not going to do that thing. So this whole thing about inversion, about trying to avoid problems instead of solving them, vicarious learning, it's all laid out in his talks and his letters and his speeches and all that. He had a wonderful talk called Prescription for Guaranteed Misery in Life. I remember that talk, in which he lays out 7 things that you must do if you want to be miserable. And it's obvious, the idea is that if you don't do those things, then you will not have a miserable life. So his lessons are not just about investing, it's also about life in general, how to lead a good life. And I think he led a very good life.
Right. So Sanjay, you have sort of covered pretty much everything, all the big concepts that he has talked about, but let's take them one by one. The first question I have is, you said, how power of compounding, determines everything. So you think about companies and modes and everything in that way. How does it tie to concentration? Because that is also a point you made.
Well, it's about scarcity, right? If you are the purity of the idea of quality investing is that by definition, most businesses will be mediocre businesses. The question you have to start with is this a good business? Is it a great business? Is it a mediocre business? Is it a lousy business? And you really want to end up with what you think is a great business. You may be right or wrong on that, but essentially you're trying to zoom into a small subset of businesses available for investing, which you regard as great businesses. And once you have done that, by definition, you're not going to find very many. And if you find them, then you should hold on to them for very long periods of time. So the holding period concept of very long holding periods comes from there. Concentration comes from there, because the idea is that these are scarce ideas. You're not going to find very many, and what are you going to replace them with? So buy good stuff and hold on to it for very long periods of time. And if you really think about it, Mahalakshmi, if you take a survey of about 100 people who have done very well in financial markets, I think more than 90% of them, more than 90 of them, would have done by buying what they thought were great companies, which turned out to be great companies, and they just sat on their ass and they ignored a lot of the stuff out there. So this whole concept of ignoring noise and buying and holding and not doing frequent trading, all of it flows from the idea that good businesses are very few and far between, and when you find them, just don't do anything, just sit on your ass after owning them.
Sure. So there are, people, for example, I had an opportunity to interview Daniel Kahneman some time back, and I was asking him, whom would you rate as a better investor, Jim Simmons or Warren Buffett? And he said clearly Jim Simmons, because there is a section of the market which believes that this is a probabilistic game. All these things become clear only in hindsight. But Buffett himself has said that, their idea of investing is eliminating risk, try to eliminate risk as much as possible through research and, focusing on your circle of competence and stuff like that. So when you put these two arguments together, what would you advise to an average investor?
So I think I'll focus on what will you advise to the average investor. I think that's important because, Jim Simmons is the exception. You have to look at the base rates,
Right.
Again, I go back.
But by the same logic, Buffett is also an exception, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you look at success, if you study success of investing in public markets, I think a huge percentage of people who have succeeded in financial markets are not day traders, are not algorithmic traders, are people who basically bought things, good things, and then just sat on them for a long, long period of time. So again, that's practical reality. If you look at that, and they may not have exactly copied the methods of Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, but essentially they bought good businesses and they just sat on them for a long, long period of time. Uh, Maybe they got lucky, but the point I'm making is that if it was just pure luck, then it wouldn't have lasted, right? But if you look at success in this field, it primarily comes from not day trading, not algorithmic trading, not a whole lot of things that people do which will succeed. Yeah, you will look at Jim Simmons, he has a fantastic track record, but how many people have been able to copy what he has done?
Right.
But the essence of the idea, the simplicity of the ideas of investing in really good businesses and being patient with them has worked wonders for millions of people. And by the way, that also applies to even investing in an index fund. Index by definition is constituted of the most important businesses in a country, and there is a survivorship bias aspect over there. The crap stuff sort of gets dropped out of the index. The fraudulent companies are eliminated over a period of time. And if you just buy that thing and hold on, the inherent returns on capital on those businesses and the growth will give you that upside. And there are no transaction costs, so the leakage is so much less. So you're not paying a lot of commissions and so on. And all of those things do play a role. Essentially, what is the idea of index fund? Buying a bunch of businesses which have been pre-selected by a bunch of people using their own methods.
Right.
And they have reasonable returns on capital, and you just hold on to them for long periods of time. And that's all that there is to it, right?
Fair enough. So the other thing is about what you also said, right? He always, there is this quote that is really famous that, tell me where I'm going to die and I'm never going to go there. This is a principle he took away from, mathematician Jacobi, invert, always invert. How
Right.
does that tie into investing? Is there some, template or a list that you can give us in terms of avoidables? For example, leverage is very clear that,
Yeah.
high leverage is definitely something you should avoid because that kills you. Can you interpret this statement for us in the context of investing, what not to do?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not leverage, of course, is a very big one. Leverage is a source of fragility, and, people do get aggressive, and leverage comes from over optimism. Excessive leverage comes from over optimism. He talked about how he and Buffett talked about how long-term capital management imploded. And these are like very smart people with very high IQs, Nobel laureates, and they went bust. Basically, he was he learned all this from his own mentor, Ben Franklin, who was completely averse to leverage, and in fact he related leverage to slavery. So Munger was all about freedom, financial independence, and being ability to think clearly. So leverage was one big no-no. There are many others. For example, he would say, stay away from a poor quality business. There will be ups and downs, and there will be temporary shortages that will create earnings boost, but that's not a durable way of making money. There will be sort of boom and bust cycles. Stay away from fraudulent managements, or people who are have a very poor track record in allocation of capital. Stay away from serial acquirers, for example, because the base rate is extraordinarily low. I mean, paradoxically, Berkshire is a serial acquirer, but they have a system, they have a way of acquiring businesses which is not usually followed by most people out there. So there's a lot of mortality in serial acquirers. So he would say, stay away from those people. And he would talk about, a whole lot of things. Stay away from, gambling, people who get into day trading, for example. So he had a lot of lessons for investors as to what to avoid and what not to do. And clearly he said, look at all the big disasters that happened, go into the causal factors. And his whole philosophy was, learning comes not from mediocrity. And if you look at the world out there, there are these extreme successes and extreme failures, and you can learn from both. And people tend to copy extreme successes, which is fine, but you can also learn by looking at big failures and the causal factors. And it's clear, to me, that there are many ways of making money, and there are only a few ways of blowing up. So by avoiding ways in which people tend to blow up, is something that you can learn from by avoiding. As I said earlier, using Charlie's word, you don't have to pee on an electric fence to learn not to do it.
Right.
And a lot of people have done just that. So every year you have some new case studies that come about. There was a company called Valiant which went belly up, and he was very negative on that company, the business model, the financial practices, the management practices, and all of that. There have been many other cases where he called out that there is something wrong. This is not going to end well. So he could clearly see that the kind of things that are combining together to produce what he would call as Lollapalooza outcomes. In this case, bad outcomes. It was obvious to him, and it is not always obvious to a lot of people because they get carried away by the social proof and the and the FOMO and the euphoria of the moment. So he had this ability to have a completely independent mindset and not being influenced by what everybody else is doing. So he would tell you to keep away from the popular stuff. And those are all very important concepts to learn. It's all laid out by him in his talks. So one only has to try to learn from those talks and implement whatever he taught us.
Right. Sanjay, the other quote that really, stays with me, and it's also a very important concept, I think, is, the fact that he says that I never allow myself to hold an opinion unless I'm able to argue the others. I know the other side's argument better than them. How do you internalize this? And I'm also juxtaposing this against, a quote that Morgan Housel says, which is that, often the financial debates in stock markets especially tend to be investors with different time horizons talking over each other. So when you frame a debate or a stock debate in your mind, is there a way to think about it? What should be the assumptions? How do you lay it down for yourself in your mind so you're sure that you're able to cross the two sides and say that my side or my thinking is still in the right direction?
Absolutely. No matter how much you love a business that you want to invest in, there will always be reasons to not do it. So there are two aspects to this. One is how to think about reasons not to do something and how to have a more balanced view, so to speak. And again, Charlie's mentor, Ben Franklin, wrote a document called Prudential Algebra in a letter, a few hundred years ago. And in that letter, he laid out his method of thinking about a problem that he was trying to solve. And he said there are many arguments in favor of this solution, and there are some arguments which are against this solution. He will lay them down on a piece of paper, for and against, and he would then try to think about how many arguments for will counterbalance how many arguments against. So there could be like two arguments for which will counterbalance one argument against, and we'll strike them out. And he will go down this process until he had a view about where the balance lies. And then he would sleep over this, and then he will decide the next day. I think in investing as well, you need somebody to talk to. You need somebody who is knowledgeable, who is a peer, who is not just a devil's advocate who's going to argue for the sake of arguing or to put down your idea, but to make you aware that, have you thought of this? Did you miss this? But so you need somebody to talk to, and I think that role was played beautifully by him when he and Warren Buffett would talk about their investing journeys. But as you mentioned, what Morgan Housel has written, if you go onto Twitter, or if you go on to even Moneycontrol for that matter, when you look at all these threads, people have one single view. People tend to accumulate their views by hanging out with people who agree with them, and that's not the right way of thinking. You need somebody who disagrees with you, but not just for the sake of disagreement, but logically disagrees with you and lays out his reasoning for that. And then you have to be independent about the whole thing and decide how to balance counter arguments. And that's not going to happen on social media. Social media, people have polarized views, and social media actually increases the polarity. So you have to have a peer group of people who have your welfare in their mind, who are knowledgeable, and who want to talk to you, not about this particular idea, but about how you thought about that idea. It's more about not just thinking, but about thinking, what we call as meta thinking. So the process, you may have missed something, you may have missed out an important factor, and therefore you need somebody to talk to help you think through that properly. I think that part is very well understood by students of Charlie Munger, whereas what Morgan Housel, I think, was referring to is about the dangers of being on social media and on Twitter and on Facebook and many other platforms where you sort of assemble really cults or people who totally agree with you. You don't make good decisions by hanging out with people in cults.
Right. So, Sanjay, there is also another question in the same thought that, you talked about having a sounding board and the fact that, Charlie Munger played such a vital role as a sounding board for Buffett. And if you really look at this partnership, it has worked out beautifully for many, many decades. Even marriages don't last that long. Of course, that is for a different reason. But if you look at the two people, they appear to us as very different people, right? Like Buffett is like full of, optimism. He is jovial, gregarious. Charlie Munger is exactly the opposite. He sounds a lot more pessimistic, sarcasm in, every line. So they sound like very different people.
Yeah.
And generally, the tendency for most of us is to veer towards people who have concurrent views or, who agree with us. Confirmation bias in every single thing counts for a lot for all of us. So, how do you think people can really navigate this? Is it just that, somehow they, stars aligned and they got together and worked out, or is there a conscious way that you can develop this? I know I'm sounding a little philosophical here, but I think having a sounding board is a very vital part of getting your thoughts cleared, especially when it comes to investing.
Well, I think a lot of academic research has happened in this. Organizations which are very innovative consist of teams which are small but have also got people with very diverse backgrounds and views and and thought process. It's just by bringing them together that you create something, create synergies. So in that sense, Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett actually had that. They were very different personalities. And as you mentioned, Mr. Buffett is gregarious, fun-loving, very optimistic kind of a person. Where Charlie Munger sometimes took the role of looking at the downside always. And I think in investing, it makes a lot of sense to look at the downside risk and also think about the upside potential. So that combination was a wonderful combination. I think the same logic applies to all of us. Why can we not replicate what they have done? So they're actually telling us a way to become better decision makers by not just being on your own, but by having allies, by having friends, by having peers who you can talk to and who can help you think through this complex problem about business and investment analysis in a very clear manner. I think you need somebody to be able to help you do that for you. And the other thing here is the ego. They don't have big egos. If you want to be successful in investing, you have to keep your egos in check. It's a spiritual idea, and I don't think they talked about it in a spiritual context, but essentially, these two people are very spiritual. They were detached and they were not egoistical. And, even if and they gave each other a lot of leeway. There are a lot of decisions that were taken by Berkshire, which Charlie Munger was not in agreement with, but he didn't have a fight with his partner that if you do this, I'm going to walk out, and he let him do those things, and then they both face the consequences of those things, no matter what. And a lot of mistakes that have happened in Berkshire could be attributed to the mistakes that Mr. Buffett made, and perhaps were cautioned by Mr. Munger, which he did not listen to. I don't know, but I just can visualize that the fact is they never had a fight, and that's important because. And the reason why you don't have fight is because you have aligned interests, you have different viewpoints, and future is uncertain, but different people assign different weights to different factors. So and by keeping egos in check, you end up becoming a much better decision maker. And I'm reminded of Munger's advice. It's about marriage, but I think it also applies to investing and about partnerships in life in general, is that you should keep your eyes wide open before you get married, but only partly open afterwards. I think they were very good at that.
Right. Cool. Okay, another big thought, the power of incentives. Munger has talked about it a lot, and in the context of, in fact, he says, if you can think of the power of incentives, then, don't think about anything else. So, how do you interpret that in the context of stock markets? For example, how incentives play a role in the way IPOs are structured and how they might be bad investments. So can you give us 3 or 4 areas where we need to think about the incentive structure and that can influence your investment decisions?
Well, I think it's a very important part of the social psychology sort of framework created by Charlie Munger. And he talks, he puts incentives on the number one. He says you have before you solve any problem, you have to first think about the incentives, especially when you're dealing with problems not in physics but in social sciences. We're dealing with human beings, and he had a way of of explaining these ideas in complex ideas in a very simple manner. He would use words like whose bread I eat, his song I sing. He was talking about the incentive cost bias. And he said that there are people, for whatever reasons, will do things because they need the money. They need the So he was really empathizing with them, but he was looking at it from a detached point of view, from a societal point of view, that look at this situation. There are a lot of people who work for an organization which is making something which is bad for humanity. Could be day trading, could be tobacco, could be anything, but it will get sold because the people who are going to sell that, they need the money. So basically the employment relationship causes terrible cognition. That's what he talked about a lot. So he was very cagey about, and by the way, this is the reason why he wanted to be financially independent. His whole logic of financial independence was not about being rich just for the sake of richness, but also becoming completely aware of the world really works. And you can't really do that unless you are financially independent. And he would quote Upton Sinclair, who said that if you need the salary, it's very hard for somebody to agree to something when your agreement is required for getting a monthly salary. So he said that it's difficult for a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. So he was very blunt about these things. The reason why he was very blunt was because he was financially independent. He had sort of debiased himself. And this is something which I also tell my students, that you can learn a lot about these biases in human nature, but a lot of these biases which are sort of hardwired in us cannot be sort of unwound unless you are financially independent, because then you can look at the world the way it really is. On incentives, he talked about how perverse the incentives are in the world of business. He talked about the lending businesses, for example, where a lot of the good stuff is front ended and all the bad stuff is back ended. And he would tell you lovely stories about how to think about this. And I remember one story he said, in which he said that it's easy to lend money and fool yourself into believing that you will make a good rate of return. It reminds me of a story about two men in a sword fight, and one of them takes a big swipe on the other one's neck, whereupon the other one says, "You missed me." The swiper says, "Wait until you shake your head." So so the head has been cut off, but you don't know it yet. And that happens so often in the world of levered financial institutions. We see that a lot, right?
Right.
Suddenly there's an impairment, and suddenly the stock tanks 90%, 95% in just a day's time. So it happens over and over again, and again it's caused by bad incentives. If the incentives are bad, you're going to get bad outcomes. And here again, he empathized with the human beings. He was actually a systems thinker. He would say, if the system design is bad, if your incentive structure in an organization is perverse, then you're going to get perverse outcomes. If you put sugar in the corner, the ants are going to accumulate over there. So the problem is not with the ant, the problem is the guy who put the sugar over there. So be very careful about how you design systems. And he thought a lot about on that subject, and it's all laid out in his talks.
So in financial markets, Sanjay, can you call out 3 or 4 systems where we have, incentive systems that are structured against the interest of investors? We of course talk about this
conflict. You can do a better job on that, Mahalakshmi. I think you've been an observer of people in financial markets for so many years, and you met so many people. So yeah, I don't want to name people, but yeah, absolutely. I think there are perverse incentives in the mutual fund industry. There are perverse incentives it's all over the place. Just have to be thoughtful about understanding this side of this part of human nature. Again, I don't want to blame the players. I want to blame the systems that we have created. Take the accumulation of assets under management. Everybody knows that if you have a lot of assets in an industry, then the returns will go down, because more money means lower returns going forward. And but that doesn't stop the asset accumulators to keep launching more and more schemes, because it's good for them. The belief that what's good for you will also be good for the client is often not right. So it's there in so many situations. It's there in the world of business, not just in the world of money management. And look at perverse incentives in the pharmaceutical industry. how doctors get bribed by pharmaceutical, manufacturing companies, and so on. So they would do things to recommend your drug instead of a generic, for example. So there are, you actually have to put on that hat of perverse incentives and go around looking at industry after industry, business after business, and look at the incentive structure as to how are the people in this industry incentivized. Are their incentives right or wrong? Are they in alignment with the interest of all the owners, or are they in alignment with the interest of only one group of people?
Okay, fair enough. So, one last question. One is, Munger has also said that, and they have demonstrated also that, Berkshire is a learning machine, and Buffett and Munger are learning machines. And he has made the statement that, skill sets that are relevant or get you past one decade will not get you past the next decade. And obviously, at some point in time, people could not fathom that they would ever invest in technology. They said so, but then they ended up investing in Apple also. So today, the way markets are poised, and I'm saying because there was a time when Ben Graham's strategy really worked like a charm. It was, picking up stocks which were statistically cheap. But in the post-Buffett era, the concept of moat, competitive advantage, intangibles, brand, that is what really made you money over long periods. Now, as we enter this phase of AI, technology, etc., do we need to think about investing or investing a framework differently? What aspects of what Charlie Munger and Buffett have given us remain relevant forever, and what are some of the aspects that you think we must refresh or renew or rethink?
I think that's a great question, Mahalakshmi. And basically, there are things that won't change. There are things that are changing all the time. The three things that won't change are these three basic principles of investing. Number one, that underneath every stock and bond, there's a business, and therefore you have to think like a businessman or a business person, not like somebody who buys pieces of paper to be traded on the next moment. The second one is the markets can be extremely erratic and irrational, and therefore you have to be very detached from that, and you have to have an independent mind about what value is, and then take advantage of the irrationalities that exist in the market. And these are all caused by the biases that we have talked about just now, and there are so many more out there. And the third thing is the concept of margin of safety, that you have to have a margin. The margin in Graham's time came from low price in relation to asset value, for example. In the eras of Philip Fisher and Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, it has come from the quality of a business. I don't know where it will come from in the future, but it will change. The source might change, but the principle doesn't change. So I think that's important, and I think Mr. Munger's passing is not going to hurt Berkshire in any meaningful way, because he and Mr. Buffett have groomed a bunch of people who are much younger than them and who think differently from them. They have been given a lot of power and authority and delegation of even capital for them to deploy. And many of the businesses that they have bought, these youngsters have bought, are not the businesses that Mr. Munger or Mr. Buffett would have bought or even thought about buying, because they understand that as you grow old, you become brain blocked. Your ways of thinking are very different. The world has changed, but you have not changed, or the world has changed faster than you can change. And you're mortals. You're going to go. So how do you create a virtual and immortal organization, which I think Berkshire is? If there were candidates of immortal organization, I would regard Berkshire as one on the top. It's one of the most anti-fragile businesses out there. And that has not been created by accident. It's been created by design. A lot of thinking has gone into that. Look at the succession planning that they have talked about in their letters for the last more than 20 years. So what has happened was something that was inevitable, and they were prepared for it. And I think part of the preparation was that there will be people who will think differently from us. We have to groom them right now, and we have to give them authority to do things that we wouldn't do. And I think that they have done brilliantly.
Sure. So, Sanjay, 3 or 4 of your quotes of Munger that you really love.
Well, I've already spoken. I mean, the one which I like the most, one of the best ones, is about the idea of You don't have to pee on an electric fence to learn not to do it. Actually, I found a video of a guy peeing on an electric fence. I show that to my class and the students are laughing. And then I show example after example of people figuratively peeing on electric fences by, levering up the balance sheets or being over aggressive or becoming serial acquirers, and what happens then. So, it's all about vicarious learning. The other one is about incentives, about, you don't have to ask a Baba whether you need a haircut.
Right.
And the third one is about multidisciplinary thinking, that, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So think outside, try to jump jurisdictional boundaries, talk to people from different disciplines. And even in the world of investing, there are people who are in trading or in doing technical analysis or doing stuff that you don't want to do or you don't want to do anymore. But there's nothing wrong in talking to those people, because you will get exposed to different ideas, different points of view. I think that's very important. And I think by using these words, both Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, they have this way of words of teaching some ideas which are very powerful ideas, but then those ideas stick better with you because you remember those words. He had a word called Lollapalooza, which you will not find it anywhere.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's about confluence of many factors moving in one direction. How 1 + 1 + 1 could become 6 or 7. And I think we see that a lot in the world of business when you have confluence of some favorable factors coming together. So, again, you're reminded of Lollapalooza the moment you see that. So it's all about patterns. It's all about recognizing patterns and having a way to, recognize a pattern. And I think the best way to do that is to ask you questions. Have I seen this before? And if I've seen it, why does it remind me of it? I think this is exactly what Charlie Munger taught by asking you to look at thousands of businesses out there, those who succeed, those who fail, learn from them, and become good recognizer of pattern. Not just patterns of business behavior, but patterns of human behavior as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sanjay. It's always a delight talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mahalakshmi. Thank you so much for inviting me.